Okay. Now we go to item 6, and we start with Director Malloy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tonight, we will be working with the 3 secondary ARC processes, and trustees will be happy to know that the introduction that I will be providing at this time will be the only time I provide the one introduction, because frankly it goes for all 3 processes. So I would like to welcome our community here who has worked so very, very hard this past year to assist this evening, as well as staff who are here to assist this evening as we bring forward these very important reports. But before we engage in the specific reports themselves, I would like to communicate some very important foundational beliefs regarding what it is that we're doing this evening. At Hamilton Wentworth District School Board, we are committed to creating the most effective, innovative learning environments so that every one of our students will reach their full potential in schools and beyond as they prepare for the 21st century. We undertook accommodation reviews to help make this a reality. The reviews are one way HWDSB can maximize limited resources by reducing the space we don't need and upgrading facilities that remain. Ultimately, this will result in better learning environments for students. We want our students to have quality spaces that support student achievement. Concentrating our finite resources to create the best learning environments is an effort that goes hand in hand with our efforts to provide the best, most engaging programs that prepare our students for success. In reviews of 15 secondary schools, we had an expanded dialogue with our community about the challenges and opportunities our students face. We have approximately 2,600 extra spaces in our secondary schools, a number expected to reach nearly 6,000 spaces by 2020. And this has led to the discussion we will continue to engage in this evening. These reviews, though, have been much more than space, however. We know today's learner requires new approaches and that we must respond with engaging programs in safe, nurturing, and innovative learning environments, as I'd mentioned. This is why public dialogue also highlighted our program strategy that we envision for our schools. It is through our program strategy that we hope to provide programming that reflects our board's strategic priorities of achievement, engagement, and equity. We are restructuring what we offer, where we offer it, how we can help all students achieve their full potential, and we envision a school system in which all students can find what they need at our schools. It's about pathways to success for each and every one of our students. And though the challenging discussions around actual school buildings certainly are front and foremost, as trustees are aware, we've never ever forgotten about the significance of our programs for our students. Often we've heard, what is this program strategy? What does it mean and what does it attempt to do? And so there's just a couple of high-level points I'd like to make before I turn this over through you to the Associate Director. Our program strategy, first and foremost, ensures academic excellence so all students achieve their full potential. Our program strategy believes in providing equity of access, opportunity, and outcome so that every student in HWDSB is able to attend the school that provides the program to facilitate their success. Our program strategy provides pathways, university, college, workplace, and to the community in every school. It offers specialized programs in each school based upon a board-wide view of how to best serve our students. It engages every student by honoring their voice and allowing them choice with a wide range of program options to meet their interests. It supports effective and seamless transitions, and it promises that all students benefit from effective instruction, appropriate intervention, leading to their graduation. We believe in equitable, inclusive, and diverse learning environments, bringing together students with different strengths, needs, and backgrounds. Why? Because research and experience tells us that those are the most effective schools to help our kids achieve. So in closing of this introduction, which as I said will capture all 3 of the committee's work this evening, these guiding principles we believe will assist us in terms of our program strategy over the next while. Our program strategy, though of course, is dependent upon our facilities, which is why we are all here this evening. And we believe by concentrating our resources, By placing our programs in equitable and accessible ways in our system and focusing on student voice, we will make that difference for our students. Our strategic directions have focused us and continue to focus us. Our students communicate to us what they need, and our belief is about achievement, engagement, and equity, as you know. And we do believe and we do hope that the challenging work that has happened over the last year and the challenging work that is now being brought into this boardroom for you as the board to deal with directly is a challenge, but also an opportunity that could very, very quickly become great opportunities for our students. So through you, Mr. Chair, with that introduction, I would ask that we turn this over to Associate Director Bain.
Associate Director Bain.
Thank you. We're going to begin a series of slides this evening. And before I launch into the introductory slides, I'll express my appreciation, first of all, to our communities for the literally hundreds of hours they've contributed individually and collectively to the accommodation review process. We really do appreciate their involvement and their interest and their commitment to the future of Hamilton Wentworth District School Board. In addition, I'd like to express my appreciation to staff for the hundreds and hundreds of hours that each of them has contributed to this undertaking. It has been no small undertaking, as we're all very well aware, and perhaps unique in the province of Ontario, given the scope of the work that we have chosen to undertake. Not only the scope relative to the number of schools involved, but as Director Malloy has indicated, our interest in undertaking a program review as well as an accommodation review. And my thanks to all of my colleagues in facilities management and around the Executive Council table for their many, many, many hours of dedication. I'm going to start off just briefly to remind trustees about the timelines that will unfold from this evening on. 2 weeks hence, a board meeting to ratify the Committee of the Whole report from this evening, and then 3 public meetings, at which point trustees and staff will be here to listen to public input on the reports. And I note the dates, 3 different evenings set aside for the 3 secondary arcs. Then the first date upon which trustees can make decisions, at least initial decisions at the committee level, will be May the 14th. You're all probably well aware that there's a requirement for a 60-day wait period beyond the board meeting on February 27th. And the first scheduled Committee of the Whole meeting subsequent to that 60-day period is May 14th. And then follow up with ratification on the May 28th board meeting. Before we turn the microphone over to the chair of the North Arc, Superintendent Corcoran, and the presenters, I just want to remind everyone of the terms of reference for each of the arcs. And I'll just pause and give everyone an opportunity to have a quick review of those terms of reference. And you will see those terms of reference reflected in the reports that you'll receive this evening.
And just get you hang one second, Associate Director Bain. I see Trustee Brandon with her hand.
Yes, I just going back to the previous slide, just in terms of timelines, I just want to be clear. I mean, it is clear in the notion that we would have one special hearing per each ARC review report. If it turned out that that was more than that, does the 60 days, sorry, I may be giving the wrong number, but the required time start with the first special hearing of that review, or is at the end of the period in which the review has had conversation? And what, would that change anything in terms of the Board of Trustees making final recommendations and the dates related to that? I just want some clarity on that.
You got the gist of that, Associate Director?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So through you, the 60-day period commences February 27th.
Thank you. Is that clarified?
And as long as the if there were subsequent hearings, be our recommendation to fit them within the 60-day period, of course.
So if I could say it out loud, then the first special hearing for a particular review has to be after that 60-day period or within. Can I just have some clarity? Within the 60-day period? Yeah. So let me ask the simpler question. If a special hearing then, let's say there were quite a number of submissions from one group and we had to do it over 2 evenings or such, would we still be held to that May 14th time for the Board of Trustees and the Committee of the Whole? I just want to know if there would be any change in the timeline.
Associate Director.
Through you, Mr. Chair, presuming that you could fit a second evening in between March 27th and May 14th, that would be within the 60-day time frame. The 60 days, by the way, for trustees is a minimum number of days, so it can't be any earlier than that 60-day period, but it could be longer. So if needed, if we had to, we could change the May 14th meeting date.
Thank you. That's
Okay.
answered my
Thank
question.
you. Trustee Terpstra.
Just like this evening, we're hearing, the 3 recommendations and we have nothing else on our agenda. Well, we had the King George. I'm respectfully requesting that we do not debate all of the final recommendations from trustees on May 14th. It's not fair to us. It's not fair to the communities. Those committee of the wholes, there should be one separate one for each one. This is a huge, huge decision. Ratification, I don't mind when that is, really, but the actual debate, there is a 0% chance that should happen all on May 14th, all in one night, because I would feel really badly for the ARC that is last.
I think that's an excellent point, and I'm sure the chair has heard that. So we will discuss.
Thank you.
Nothing else? Back to you, Associate Director.
Thank you. So we've reviewed the timelines and the terms of reference, and now I'm going to turn the microphone, not literally, but over to Superintendent Corcoran as the chair of the North Accommodation Review Committee. Superintendent Corcoran will have some opening remarks and will introduce our guests and presenters from the North Arc.
Thank you, Associate Director. Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the chair. The North Accommodation Review Committee worked diligently from January 11th, 2011 until January 10th, 2012 to develop an accommodation strategy for the 6 secondary schools identified within their term of reference. As the chair of this committee, I really wish to take this opportunity to thank the members for their very hard work, their careful consideration of the information that was presented to them from a variety of sources, and their dedication to the difficult task that was presented to them. I commend them for how well they worked together to reach their ultimate decision. And tonight I am pleased to introduce the following members of the North Arc who will be presenting the group's report. So to my right, Nancy Leach, Mark Curry, and Scott Barr. And at this point, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to them.
Yes, the Jen voice is going to have to work. On behalf of my colleagues and all members of the North Arc, I'd like to thank the board for the opportunity to present our recommendations this evening. And if we can begin, just as a reminder for those that might not be familiar with the current boundaries and the schools that are involved, the North Arc was responsible for looking at Orchard Park, Glendale, Sir Winston Churchill, Delta, and Sir John A. Macdonald, along with Parkview Secondary. You'll notice that Parkview lies also within the Delta boundary, but it actually has no boundaries as it is a system school which is designed to meet the needs of students with exceptional learning needs. we were faced with reducing surplus pupil places. The current capacity of those 6 schools is just north of 7,000 pupil places. The current enrollment is just over 5,400 students, making a deficit of just over 1,600 pupil places. Projections have those rising to just under 2,700 by the year 2020, 2021. And so after much work and debate and discussion and listening to a number of presentations from members of the community, we recommend this evening to close Delta, Parkview, and Sir John A. Macdonald and construct a new facility on a centrally located site, which is as yet to be determined. The new school is proposed to be a 1,250 pupil place school, centrally located. I would caution the use of the downtown core. At one of our public meetings, the term downtown core caused some misunderstanding in terms of its location. Ideally, the members of the community would like to see that building somewhere in between, approximately halfway between Delta and Sir John A. Macdonald. The boundaries for the new school would include all of the existing Sir John A. Macdonald catchment area and the majority of the Delta catchment. We'll explain that further when we get to the exception. And a target opening date for the new facility would be 2015. There was a program recommendation that went along with the plant recommendation. It is part of a bigger program recommendation for the entire North Arc. It includes programs of choice and specialized programs, specialist high skills majors programs, as well as varying degrees of special education support for the students of the Hamilton-Wentworth District School Board. As I said, it is part of a bigger program. It is definitely in need of tweaking depending upon facilities and demand. I don't think it's finalized. It is simply a recommendation to put something on paper to begin the process. So as we said, the closing of Sir John A. Macdonald, assuming the new facility is ready to go, would take effect of June of 2015. The existing catchment of Sir John A. becomes part of the new school. Delta Secondary also recommended for closure effective June of 2015. The majority of their existing catchment area would also become part of that new school, with the small Queen Mary section transferring instead of to the new school to Sir Winston Churchill. Parkview Secondary School, recommended for closure June 2015 as well. The entire Parkview program will be accommodated within the new school, but there is a very strong recommendation from all members of our ARC. It was a unanimous point of discussion that we recommend a post-ARC committee to be formed to assess the needs of those students and ensure that all aspects of their program be looked at so that we make sure we look after those students. Moving forward, a very quick look at some of the relocated programs. Again, subject to student interest, facilities availability, staffing. Again, programs of choice, specialized programs, specialist high skills major, as well as special education supports. You'll notice also that the boundary realignment includes Queen Mary, which used to be part of Delta. Glendale Secondary, there is no boundary change recommended. There will simply be some of the programs moving or being created to increase the offerings of Glendale. Again, programs of choice, specialist high skills majors, and special education components. And lastly, Orchard Park Secondary School, no change to its boundary, but some relocation and creation of new programs as well in all 3 areas. And at this point, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Mark.
Thank you, Scott. So a quick look at the map then. This would be what the proposed boundaries would look like with the closure of the 3 schools recommended by the North Arc. Essentially, the boundaries of Orchard Park and Glendale remain the same. So Winston Churchill increases slightly with the addition of Queen Mary being moved from Delta to Sir Winston Churchill. And then the remainder of the Delta catchment area and Sir John A. Macdonald being the basis for a new school. Looking at the numbers, as Scott mentioned earlier, so we have currently about 7,000, a little bit more than 7,000 pupil places in the North Cluster. With the recommendation to close Sir John A. Macdonald, Parkview, and Delta Secondary School by 2015, that number drops down to a surplus of 10 students, so basically 100% utilization rate. Over the next 5 years, we maintain a utilization rate of in excess of 90%. Specifically looking at the numbers, you can see that the new school that was proposed for 1,250 pupil places since its inception would be over capacity. Sir Winston Churchill, which is currently over capacity, would maintain a high utilization rate. Orchard Park would maintain pretty much the status quo. The only school not specifically addressed with the North Arc recommendation is Glendale, which sees some decline in its overall utilization rate. But as a North Cluster, in 2020, 2021, you can see 91% of the schools are, pupil places are occupied. When looking at the cost, in order to construct a new school of approximately 1,250 pupil places, we're looking at an approximate cost of about $32.5 million. In order to acquire land, it was decided that a 15-acre site would be optimal for a new secondary school. The approximate value of per acreage there, along with program strategy of moving programs and creating programs, any other costs associated with that. Basically, the idea for a construction of a new school would come in at a little over $41.5 million. In terms of how we could find the funds in order to offset that cost, the sale of the lands that currently occupied by schools to be closed, Sir John A. Macdonald, Parkview, and Delta, their acreage at the same value would bring us just under $9 million. Should funding be available from the Ministry of Education, that would offset a significant portion of it. And the end result in a comparison between the two, should funding be available from the ministry, would result in a cost to the board for a new school in the North Cluster of a little over $100,000. Looking at the legacy costs, as of 2010, when this process was started, the 6 schools in the North Cluster had a backlog of necessary upgrades and renovations in excess of $55 million. By closing the 3 schools that were selected, which also had the highest FCI numbers, basically we reduced that to a little over $36 million by 2020. In retrospect there at the bottom, in red where it says different versus current situation, should all 6 schools remain open, the cost for all 6 schools would be an additional $53 million. So basically the idea is by closing those 3 schools, we save the board in legacy costs almost $53.5 million. So the rationale for our recommendation. Basically the idea is the opportunity for a 21st century facility in the North Cluster to allow for programming that meets the needs of our students. As well, we've looked at improving the faculty or facility utilization, so from our current level up to in excess of 91%. Also, we're looking at putting positive, equitable distribution of programming across the North Cluster. We're looking at minimizing travel times and distances for students. So the idea of closing just several of these schools and not opening a new one creates a vacuum, which as a committee we looked at and had a hard time looking at the fact that there could possibly be no schools in the downtown core, however you define the downtown core. As well, in the public meetings, we've heard time and time again the attachment and the community associated with these neighborhoods, and the idea that as a committee we really wanted to put something back into these communities, that we wanted to give back to these communities and to provide the ability to create partnerships with our community members down the road. And also to increase our presence in the North Cluster, the downtown core, and not simply close schools, but to create a legacy for the future. And with that, I'm going to pass this on to my colleague Nancy. So you want to push that one?
So our additional ARC recommendations, that all schools remain open until such time as the new facility is ready to open in September 2015. What? Oh, hit it? Oh, there you go. And the students will move en masse to the new school. We talked a lot about when we were meeting relocating students, and we wanted to cause as little disruption as possible, so we only wanted one move. And that the majority of the students that are coming from the closed schools will go to the new school, so it would just require one move. And that's why we backed up the deadline to allow for that. That the North Arc has recommended that the new school be constructed on a site to be located between the existing Delta and Sir John A. Macdonald school sites. It was felt that if we had it centrally located, then it would cut down on transportation. We didn't have students going from such a increased distance. And when we looked at boundaries, it really didn't increase transportation that much for the students in terms of going to a central spot to Sir John A. and Delta. If we were to build on one of the existing sites, being Sir John A. Macdonald, Parkview, or Delta, that would be a challenge because the sites are too small to build for what we're hoping for, which is the new 21st century school. And if we're at one end or the other of the boundary areas, then again it would be too much of a distance one way or the other. And as my colleague mentioned, it would be a strategy that would add to the revitalization of the city as a whole and the downtown core, being that nowadays schools are seen as the center of a community, and when we heard from our community partners and their interest in partnering with us, they saw that as the core to the community, and they felt that by not having something, some kind of new school, that it would add to the slow death of the community. Additionally, in terms of the Parkview recommendation, I'm not so good at that, I guess. What's that? No, I don't need it anymore. That's the last slide. I'm good. We talked at length about what to do about Parkview. I'd say that 70 to 75% of our discussions were about that, because we felt that that was the center point to making our other decisions. We were having trouble deciding how to solve the problem of Parkview, because we really did feel that it needed to be preserved rather than integrated into an existing school, because there's some special elements about Parkview. As it is a separate facility, it allows for that programming for that special portion of our vulnerable students. So we wanted to just highlight that our interest was in preserving the program for Parkview and Parkview-like students. So to do that, we felt that our only solution to that quandary was, because it would require another year to decide that, that we make up a post-art committee that was comprised of all people that would have a say and a stake in that, including school council members, parents, staff, community members, and to make the informed direction around the transition program facilities and supports necessary for the preservation of the Parkview program. Oh, it says mountain up there. Well, they can come along too, I guess. Don't forget that. And that, of course, that the facilities management consult with the principal and teacher specialists to ensure that the existing facilities meet the program strategy and address the renewal needs. We didn't want the schools that were left open to be forgotten in terms of what their needs are, because they definitely need renewal money. So that's it.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to present the North Secondary Accommodation Review Staff Report. Before I do that, I'd just like to step back and show trustees, when you look at the 3 staff reports and put together the recommendations that we are presenting, it does afford us an opportunity to have a system view. So I'd just like to run through a couple of points with respect to the overview of the 3 when you put the 3 sets of recommendations together. So it does result in the proposed construction of 2 new secondary schools.
Mr. Chair?
This is out of order.
I'm wondering if this might be out of
Yeah,
order
me too.
in terms of perhaps at the end of the 3?
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. We're focused on the north right now.
Yeah, well, through the chair, please. I think, Associate Director Urbane, I think the trustees are making a good point. Maybe we'll
Okay.
go straight to the North staff recommendation and do the overview at the end. Is that
Okay,
possible?
so everyone will have to bear with me as I click through the slide, but I'll get through that as quickly as I can, and then, there we go. So let's move right then to the final staff recommendation, which is the closure of Delta in June of 2015, the relocation of those students to Sir John A. Macdonald Secondary School, the closure of Parkview in the same month, and the relocation of those students to Sir John A. Macdonald, and the closure of Sir John A. in July of 2015, pending the availability of funding and the approval of the Ministry of Education for the construction of that new school, with a target opening of September of 2015. The recommendations reference June and then July. It is simply a matter of the order of operations, so to speak, where the schools would close officially in June, and then if there were a new school, then we would have the closure of Sir John A. Macdonald in July. So operationally, that is the sequence that we are recommending with respect to the implementation. Next slide would show the proposed boundaries for the remaining schools. In terms of the terms of reference, I just want to talk briefly about the accommodation term of reference. And it's important to note that the utilization would increase to 98% by 2015, and then decline to 91% by 2020. And the staff recommendation would see the number of surplus pupil places decreasing to 407 by the year of 2020. Without any of the closures, the utilization rate would decrease to 62% by 2020. The staff recommendation has us ending up at 91%. With respect to facility condition, the closure of the 3 secondary schools would eliminate $53 million in deferred capital, and the proposed construction of a new approximately 1,250 pupil place secondary school. The program, the director provided some introductory comments around the program. Our interest, of course, is academic excellence for our students, equity of access, outcome, and opportunity. The provides pathways in every school, and allows us to offer specialized programs in each school based on our board-wide view on how to best serve our students, and of course our program strategy. The program would engage student voice, student choice with a wide variety of program options to meet their interests and their needs and their strengths. We're looking to support the effective and seamless transition for students. Promises that students will benefit from the effective instruction and appropriate intervention, leading to graduation for students. Creates effective learning environments that are equitable, inclusive, and diverse, bringing together students with different strengths, needs, and backgrounds. And every student is different, and schools require a variety of supports to meet the needs of all learners. And I know the trustees have heard about the 3 tiers of support in previous presentations through Superintendent Corcoran. We'd be pleased to answer questions about that this evening. We're recommending the closure of Parkview Secondary School, and the recommendation is based on the following: that vocational education is offered in every secondary school, that we know from research that school environments that serve a diverse population of students are known to improve student achievement, and students who need special supports and unique learning environments will receive these supports in a composite secondary school. So we are committed to creating the transition committee comprised of parents and guardians and staff and community to help us ensure the safe and supportive relocation of the Parkview students to Sir John A. or a new secondary school in the north. We are committed to ensuring a safe and inclusive environment for the Parkview students at either Sir John A. or the new school. There are some impacts on transportation, and the final staff recommendation would result in 79% of the student population in the north residing within walking distance to their home school, and it would result in a modest increase of number of students eligible for transportation. The funding strategy for the staff recommendations, the cost is $41.5 million, with approximate proceeds of disposition totaling almost $9 million, with a business case submission to the Ministry of Education and a requirement to fund the balance of $105,000. Implementation, I did address the implementation in the final, when I was presenting the recommendations. Once again, the June and July staging of this is simply operationally ideal to stage it in that manner. So as we've said previously, both the committee members and staff have really worked tirelessly over the last year to review a number of alternative accommodation options. We agree with the North Arc in its requests and its recommendations around Delta, Parkview and Sir John A. Macdonald, and the construction of a new centrally located secondary school with a target opening date of September 2015. Upon completion of the analysis, it's the opinion of staff that the North Arc would be best served in the short and long term, as well as the board as a whole, with the staff recommendations. One final comment would be that the original recommendation of staff included the relocation of the Parkview students to their home school. In listening to the community over the course of the year, it was determined that it would be preferable for the Parkview students to move en masse to a new location, and we could provide an appropriate, safe and inclusive environment for them as a whole, and that's our preferred approach to the students at Parkview. So with that, Mr. Chair, we can pause and be prepared to answer questions and clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Associate Director. Also, thanks from the board to all members of the North Arc for their due diligence and time that they've spent in the last year working on these recommendations. Special thanks to Mark, Nancy, and Scott, of course, tonight for your fine presentation as well. And Nancy learned how to work the clicker tonight. That's that new.
2 more slides.
That's the new technology. All right, so we're open to clarification. Please don't ask about Mountain and Parkside being on the list. It's Parkview and Parkview. Trustee Hicks, have you first.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the long hours you spent and a wonderful presentation. Going through the report a couple times on the weekend, I just have 2 questions. Did your committee wrestle with the 1250 being the number for a new high school? Did that come up as the figure 1250? And I wanted to go through the associate director in that question as well.
Let's go with, who's got that? Scott, you got it? Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I believe it was recommended to us that that is the optimal size that is recommended by the Ministry of Education for a new building. We never strayed from that number. It was what was recommended to us as the optimal size, and we proceeded as such.
Thank you. The same question through the chair to the associate director. Is that ministry guidelines? I know that the South Arc, we did have, there were some discussions on the size of a new high school.
Associate Director Ban.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. 1,250 is the approximate size that we're contemplating for the North. It is, according to the experts that I work with, an optimal size for a secondary school. There are some that might say larger is better and some would say that smaller is better. Our understanding is that 1,250 provides a good range of pathways for students and a good range of program options for students, and provides the chance to resource the school appropriately.
Thank you. And for the committee, were there discussions on the availability of a site for the new school? Did the board own property, that type of thing? Because it came up.
Yeah, that.
So, through the chair.
Yeah, not sure that you're going to answer that, but let's hear what you have to say.
We did discuss site, and we're aware of the fact that there isn't an existing site that the board owns, but we really felt that with the appropriate search that you would find something that was central to that. And as we said also, that the existing sites have are just not viable.
Through the chair, the reason I ask that is because there's a feeling that you need so many acres to build a new school now. And through the chair to the associate director, were there sites from the senior management at this time? Because in your presentation, you said a new school would be there if the funding was there, but you didn't mention a suitable site.
Associate Director Bain.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have begun to review potential sites in the North and have had some very, very preliminary conversations around what those sites might be. We haven't moved too far down that road. We are interested in hearing the eventual recommendations or recommended actions that flow out of the recommendations, and presuming it's May 28th, we'll be working at it in greater earnest after we understand where the Board of Trustees has directed staff to make inquiries.
Thank you.
I think Scott has something he wants to add.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just a point of clarification from the committee's point of view. I think we were really influenced in our decision by the members of the committee and their presentation and their emphasis for their belief that we need to have, the city, that we need to have a school in that central region. And the best solution for us, which was what we saw as our mandate, was something in the central core. We recognize clearly that there's nothing sitting there right now, but in terms of minimizing travel, if a suitable site could be found, that was what we felt was best.
along the same question through the chair, the acreage is the critical thing too. I mean, you have to make sure that it's over 15 acres or whatever. I mean, I think most ARCs talked about site and acreage for a new school. And again, I appreciate the work that's gone into your presentation. Thank you.
Associate Director Bain, you want to clarify that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. 15 acres has been cited as the optimal size for a secondary school. Certainly, a number of our existing secondary schools have been built on smaller sites, but there are challenges with the smaller sites, and 15 acres is optimal. More than 15 acres, I don't think would be required.
Thank you.
Okay, I have Trustee Terkstra next.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Scott, Mark, and Nancy for your presentation. I enjoyed listening to that, and again, thank you to your entire committee for, I know, a long hours and a lot of work, so thank you again. One of the questions for clarification that I have is the utilization rates that go out of the schools to 2020. They don't include the program changes that are recommended by the committee. For a clarification, I'm sure that, you know, Glendale, if Glendale were to get French immersion, they wouldn't stay at 72%. So through you, Mr. Chair, the recommended programs are not included in the projections.
Do you want clarification on the or not? Who's best at that? Maybe.
Yeah, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the total student population is where those programs are allocated is not factored into the projection. Once that all settles down, I find in most cases you find a wash between students going from school A to school B for one program and vice versa. So overall, I don't think it's going to have too big of an influence projections throughout the entire cluster.
Okay,
Well, that may be true, but certainly French immersion would make a big difference. Maybe not if you're offering a certain high skills major. That would be interest-based, but French immersion, they're coming from all over. It would make a huge difference. So another question of clarification for the committee. When you had lengthy discussions about the Parkview students, when you were discussing the integration or the transition, were you thinking along the lines of their own wing or their own special timetabling, or you're looking at a different school day, different hours for different students? Or is this part of the work of the post-committee transition integration team? I'm just wondering, what your best thinking was on that transition. Through you, Mr. Chair.
You going to take that one, Nancy, or?
I think so.
All right, go ahead.
In terms of that discussion about how to house Parkview, which I think my understanding is what the question is, we did have discussions about wing, annex, and separate facility. Part of what was affecting our ability to get to a consensus on that was lack of understanding of the Parkview students' needs, which were different from, say, a specialized classroom. At a public hearing, we did hear from several of the Parkview students about how necessary it was for them to thrive and to succeed in a separate facility. So we did take that on. That's why we didn't get specific, and that's why we felt that the committee, the post-art committee, would be best able to determine that, because they could do deeper investigation into that issue. Speaking for the Parkview students, them being in a smaller high school, still having all the things that a regular high school has, but consideration for every single student that is actually on an individual education plan, it creates their success as opposed to being attached or having special timetabling. So we're hoping that that post-art committee can take that information and come up with something. Money is always an issue, right? And to have two separate facilities, we realize that might not be practical, but maybe to have an annex that's attached or a smaller facility that has its own programming and then maybe attached to the school for other programming, but the separateness was an issue for the students. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's great. I'm just, so it's part of the work of the post-art committee, but obviously there's been some great ideas already generated to get that ignited. The other question I had for clarification was the walking distances are now going to be longer for some students, and that often affects attendance. And we're just wondering what kind of concessions or discussions you may have had around, attendance barriers really because of these longer walks or longer bus rides to school, because it is a real issue for not only these students, but particularly these students, but if there was some thinking around maybe some accommodations for that, because attendance is very important to graduation. Thank you.
Who wants to take a crack at that? Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I'll attempt to answer that. We did discuss that, and that was actually one of the, that was a central point to a lot of our discussion about school closure is the distances, and that if you're closing community schools and asking students to travel further distances, that you might not have the same turnout as you would like. So we did look at that, and I think as a committee, our decision to look at the idea of the creation of a new school would really be a selling point, and one that really spoke to the needs of the individual learner. Through our discussions, and I don't think it was within the scope of our art, was to also look at the idea of a transportation policy, which is something that other people can look at. So definitely it factored in, but there's several factors. Where is the school going to be built? How many kids would be affected? Associate Director Bain pointed out that the change would be from, I think, 83% to 79%, so an increase of 4%. But without knowing where the school will be built, it's hard to say how many kids are going to be affected. But yes, we did consider that. So perhaps a transportation policy could be examined. Perhaps the new school would allow for finding ways to engage students and to encourage them to attend, or even in the 21st century, operating avenues that don't require them to physically be in the building all the time. So those are all things that we discussed.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. You wanted to answer something else?
I recall that we did get a few statistics in terms of it wouldn't change it that much for the students, that it was a small percentage, and that the boundaries and the like, let's say that it was right in the middle, it was only going to change it for a very small portion. But to get the true figures, it wasn't going to be we wouldn't be able to say that until we have the location.
Thanks. I've got Trustee White next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have one question for the ARC for clarification. I want to be very clear with the additional consideration for the Parkview program. And I know the recommendation, it's written in here very clearly, but I want to get very clear because I've heard others repeat it. So the other consideration is not just to establish a committee. The other additional recommendation is to, through you, Mr. Chair, preserve the Parkview program, that's the intent, and then create a committee to figure out how to incorporate that into the new school. Is that correct? It's not, because my concern is that this gets lost, and the other consideration would be to create a committee, and that committee could look at various options like moving the students to their own schools, and then their term of reference would be, slightly different, or their objective. So I just want to get that recommendation clear.
I think we're hearing nods. Superintendent Corcoran.
Thank you. Through the chair, that was definitely the committee looking at the importance of what happens in the Parkview program that would be preserved for those students in the new building. And to look at the transitions and all of those pieces would be part of the committee.
So it's to preserve the program. Okay, and Mr. Chair, I do have one follow-up question. Actually, sorry, a separate question, perhaps to you, Mr. Chair, just in terms of the program strategy So in terms of clarifying, when we receive this, we've seen the recommendations to our program strategy. Is it coming to us in one package, or is the program strategy going to be separate after we make the decision on the buildings?
Associate Director Malloy.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The program strategy recommendations that have been part of this process and that you're seeing this evening are based on a number of other pieces of work that need to happen. So for instance, many members of our community have spoken very clearly about their views regarding where programs are placed. When trustees make the decision, then there are facility issues that will impact cost. Various buildings can house things better than other buildings. So clearly what is intended by the terms of reference is for there to be recommendations placed forward, and then after final decisions are made, in terms of concretely placing this program at that school, that has to become part of an explicit process after the decisions.
Thank you. Trustee Johnson.
Thank you, through the chair. I also want to thank you for the tremendous work and the hours and hours that you've put into this and to your committee as well, the rest of the committee members. In particular, I really want to highlight, I appreciate all the work that's been done around special education. As a member of who sits on the Special Education Advisory Committee, it was important for me to see that work, especially around the accommodations of the needs of Parkview, and that certainly speaks volumes to the North End community. Trustee Terkstra already commented on some of my transportation questions that I had. I have one question left, and that's around Glendale, and I noticed that we expect by 2020 that the capacity will hit 72%. I'm just curious if there is any discussion around right-sizing the building in order to bring up that capacity.
Through the chair.
Through the chair.
Who wants to take a crack?
Through you, Mr. Chair. There are a couple of issues revolving around Glendale at this time. Right-sizing the building is rather difficult. It is one L-shaped structure, for lack of a better term. There's not a section that could be closed, etc. There is also consideration for program changes. There is a recommendation at this time for French immersion, which might take up some of that space. And there is also consideration for our coterminous board and their closure of one of their facilities in the immediate area, which might impact our attendance. So, our enrollment rather. If they get past the issue with the karst on the mountain, there might be some additional students moving into the Glendale building.
Anything else?
Through the chair, I always like to hear that we're putting the coterminous board out of business.
Trustee Mahal.
Through the chair, I guess the process, the reason why we're here is like to eliminate surplus space and to reduce the cost. So let's remember that. So I'm just wondering if the surplus, I missed you might have to put it back, or you may have it there. The cost, was it 28 million of renovation costs for the North Arc? Was it 28 million? It was in your funding formula, and you got it down to 105,000, which is amazing. If you can build a school that pays others, and only costs us 105, you got my vote. But so I do have a concern about the 28 million, if that's what it is. How much did we defer?
Sorry, let me. I think what Trustee Mahal is talking about is the maintenance cost of the year 2020.
On the existing schools that are staying open. So that's remember the chart that had and it would save 55 in the legacy costs? I think that's what you're talking about, Trustee Mahal.
I'd just like to know, what is the cost, through the chair, by closing Delta #1 school and closing Sir John A., what is the cost of those repairs?
Okay, I think that one's Dan.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the long-term renewal savings of the closure of those three schools would be approximately $53–54 million.
And was that generated through the recap software? How did you arrive at that number? Like, you pick out the error, or did you do it through the software?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll finish off the discussion. It was generated through the recap database.
And what year was that done?
The recap database was originally began in 2003,
3?
and it's updated as projects are undertaken at the school. So it reflects a snapshot in time as of 2010.
And the cost of Delta through the recap was how much? Did you say? Because I've just wondered how much we spent on Delta since 2003. We've spent millions of dollars on that school. So I want to get the right figures.
Through you, Mr. Chair, as of 2010, the long-term renewal needs outstanding at Delta were just over $14 million.
That's a lot less. And I guess the other thing is that we're going to have to build a new school, apparently, somewhere. If it happens, that it doesn't happen, because, you know, when is a cutoff date that we will say to the ministry, if we don't get a go-ahead, whoever, if we don't get a go-ahead by 2013, shall we say, that'll be 2015, is it a no-go, is it a status quo through the committee? Is that your backup plan, or do you have one?
I presume the question's for the chair.
Yeah.
And we'll go to Associate Director. I'm not sure this is a question for clarification, but let's see what you have to say.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we would need 2 years in order to take the approval from the ministry and then open a school. So we would want some approvals, you know, by 2013 would be ideal. I want to be very clear about the staff recommendations. The first recommendation speaks about the closure of Delta, and then the second talks about the closure of Parkview, and in each of those recommendations, a move to Sir Johnny Macdonald. We're only contemplating the closure of Sir Johnny Macdonald School should we have funding and approval from the ministry. So failing the funding availability and failing approval from the ministry, recommendation 1 and 2 would still see the closure of those 2 secondary schools and the relocation of those students to Sir Johnny Macdonald.
So through the chair, and then if that happens, we'll have the 3 schools all located at Sir Johnny Macdonald if there's no funding at 2015.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that is correct.
And I guess I did, through the chair, I did ask my question about the status quo. Is there a backup plan if there's no funding? The staff or the community? Or are we right back?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the backup plan, using Trustee Mulholland's words, will be the closure of Parkview and the closure of Delta and the relocation of those students to Sir Johnny Macdonald.
To you, Mr. Chair, thank you. I wanted to hear that because, you know, anyway, I want to hear the community, the committee. Do you?
Mark, Nancy, anything to say?
We discussed that at length for the committee, and we determined that because that was beyond the scope of what we were deciding, that a backup plan wasn't really what we wanted to do. And we also felt, and I'm going to be honest, that having a backup plan, having a choice B, was going to weaken our position in terms of choice A. And we thought that if it wasn't going to happen, that would be something that could be determined by you.
Through the chair, I appreciate that. I was at all the meetings and I did hear that discussion, but I just wanted to hear it.
You wanted to hear it.
I just want to hear it.
Well, you did.
Trustee Brennan.
Actually, the previous conversation has helped clarify some of the questions I had around transitioning. So I appreciate the questions from Trustee Mulholland and the answers from the staff. That's very helpful. My only other question is about the 700-seat theater. I see that in the staff report, which I have in front of me, the preference would still be a traditional theater, but a alternative could be what Waterdown High School, in fact, is using, which is a retractable theater setting. So I guess I just wanted to have an understanding of the strong preference for traditional theater, and it appeared to be in the staff report as well.
Who wants to take a crack at that? Dan? Okay, Dan.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and I'll let the committee members speak on behalf of their report. I sat in on both. With regards to the Ministry of Education, the traditional theater, as we all see in Sir John A. Macdonald, is not funded by the Ministry of Education. We receive funding more so for the type of theater that currently exists in Waterdown. The staff, or the ARC members, and I'm sorry guys, I don't want to speak on your behalf, but they felt important that if they were going to lose that theater at Sir John A., that it should be included as part of a new facility. So it's a recommendation on behalf of the committee members. I think we're all well aware that it isn't funded through the Ministry of Education, and those funds would have to be generated elsewhere.
Thank you for that.
Nancy?
Additionally, when we talked about the difference between an auditorium and a theater, we thought that a theater would be a good facility to have available for the community also. That it would be one of the bridging factors to partnerships with the community, that it wouldn't, as McDonald, they certainly have community events there. So that was part of why we opted for that language.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Trustee Orman.
My kudos to the committee members and the presenters. We thank you so very much. I did attend a couple of your meetings, and I appreciate the struggle you had for our vocational students in special education. So I thank you for that as well. What bothers me might, shall I refer to the vision here? Because it was stated in one of the recommendations through the chair that it could be that we'll have all three schools, meaning Sir John A. Macdonald, Delta, and Parkview at Sir John A. Macdonald, it bothered me somewhat because it almost anticipated that we won't get a new school. And the other evidence of that was that there has been no vision through the chair to find a site between Delta and Sir John A. Macdonald. And those are two unknowns. There would be two X's for me to say, well, what does that really mean? So what I'm trying to say is that in view of that, I have some difficulty with the committee, with both Executive Council and the committee, not looking at her. I like to ask the question, why did you not look at, if you're going to close Delta, look at the site? I know it's smaller, but I can't see in my vision any land available for anything larger than that. So where would the 15 acres plus?
Let's hear
Okay,
Director
thank you.
Malloy has to say first.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think on behalf of staff, I won't speak for the ARC Committee, I want to clarify that staff's recommendation mirrored the North Arc community, and we don't want to in any way communicate less strength to that. But we are expected in our roles to bring forward under the guideline a plan B, if you will, should ministry funding not be available. But by doing that, we in no way are trying to minimize the significance of the first strategy recommendation before you. Secondly, even though there has been on all ARCs, but specifically this one, quite a bit of discussion regarding site size, optimal size, and all of the rest, it's important for us, I believe, to present to you that once decisions are made, it provides a clearer directive for us to do the work. Please don't think that no work is happening. There's quite a bit of work that's happening. It's just not that time in the process to be discussing that particular part of the work. But I also want to say clearly that even though we talk about optimal size, 15 acres, and we understand that, When it gets to the point where we have to work through that aspect, should that be the decision, we can work with that. It doesn't have to be exact. We can work with footprints, and we can work with the facility and the size and so forth. So we hold up an ideal, we work towards that ideal, we're doing some work around that ideal, but it's still too premature to do further work until the direction is provided and the decisions are made. But I did feel it was important to assert that staff's recommendation matched the committee's, and that clarification that I appreciated the Associate Director made regarding what a Plan B is, if you will, and thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to Trustee Mulholland for getting us to clarify that further, is only in light of what the guideline expects of us.
Okay, my other query is that we're looking at building new schools through the chair for capacity of 1,200. I'm thinking we have 3 schools to put in one new school, 21st century. We want to have specialist programs. Sometimes they need a separate room, a separate facility, a separate setup from a facility. And then we want to ensure that our vocational school students, their programs at least, are maintained to the optimum. So my question is, why arrive at 1,200 when in case of Waterdown, we're building 1,700 and they're nowhere near the numbers now. So what I'm asking is, that 1,200, is that etched in stone through the chair?
Director Moore.
Through you, Mr. Chair, certainly nothing is etched in stone, but I will take the opportunity to answer the trustee's question in that, from a staff perspective, and again, I won't speak for the committee, but please, through you, if the committee would like to add to this, we see this as an exciting opportunity to consider a different way at looking at accommodation. We have looked at accommodation for hundreds of years, that you need so many desks for so many periods for so many kids, and if it doesn't add up properly, you have to build extra classrooms. We've spoken for the last 10 years about blended learning, kids being in the actual school as well as sometimes not in the school, whether they're doing e-learning work or cooperative education work. We've talked about virtual learning. We've talked about allowing our kids, who at the Student Voice Forum said to me, why are we still doing this 1, 2, 3, 4 periods, 80 minutes in the rows, in the desks, when everyone says we can learn differently? So what that challenged us to do, and by the way, not all boards have chosen to think this way, but this gives us an amazing innovative opportunity. If we really believe in that you don't have all of your student body in the school 100% of the time, then in essence to build accommodation that has all of your students in that facility 100% of the time goes against everything that we believe. So though it's not etched in stone regarding 1,250, that does, from our understanding, staff perspective, provide an optimal number to fulfill the vision where you wouldn't have the 1,400 students there maybe at all at the same time, because we've actually implemented what we've been saying is our vision and value for kids to learn in different ways, in different spaces, in different places.
May I just add through the chair, then your vision encompasses, I think, not the 21st, the 22nd century, and where we haven't really talked about virtual or online learning in this entire part. In program issues, sir, at these ARCs, that never came up. But I know what you're saying, because we have had homeschooling, we have had certain students learn online, we had the safe self-paced program that would accommodate that kind of learning. But you know, what you're saying is beautiful, but it wasn't visionary in the ARC procedure with programming. But I welcome the remarks and welcome your spirit of forging ahead. But
Thank you, Trustee.
thank
The
you.
ARC is anxiously waiting to speak.
Answer.
Your thoughts. Who's going first? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would certainly echo the director's comments in that we did discuss that very briefly. We didn't want to get bogged down by program in terms of what the long-term plan was. We believe that might be a little bit outside the scope, but certainly in answering your questions, the size of Delta was an issue, but certainly the location of Delta didn't address the spacing, the transportation issues. Building back on Delta doesn't address the spreading out of the students to various places. And I guess this really came down to our long-term vision. We looked at this as, what is the best possible legacy that we can leave for the North End through this ARC process? What's the best solution we can provide, not for the next 10 or 15 years, but for the next 50 to 75 years? What would we like to see? What would be our best scenario? And this is what we came to. Thank you.
Go ahead.
And to add to that, we talked a lot about the 21st century schooling, and it was discussed about e-learning and virtual learning, and not all students in the building at the same time, as Director Malloy said. Actually, I think that he was listening to our conversation when he said that. So although we haven't focused on that I think was our beginning point, because when we first started, we talked about our schools, our kids, and we wanted to preserve what we had. And then we realized this was our opportunity that will never happen again, that we can have all those things that we visualize and hope for. This is the opportunity, because this board isn't going to do this again.
Mr. Chair, just to add to what the committee has already said, we spent a lot of time, and when you bring up the question of 1,250 pupil places and how did we get stuck on that? Well, it was suggested as an optimal size, and for us, we didn't spend too much time on the size of the building or where the building would be, because for us it was more of a matter of what could we provide to the North End? What could we provide that would allow students an idea of 21st century learning? Because the current facilities that they're in right now are limited in what they can offer. And the other thing that we factored in is the fact that this committee has made an effort, especially in the North cluster, to revitalize and to build new elementary schools. And we were saying that as a committee, it's hard to engage these learners in their brand new elementary schools and then transition them into, in the case of Delta, an 80-year-old building, or John a 30-year-old building, 60-year-old building, an old building. But the idea is that we as a committee felt that we needed a new school, and what that new school would look like really could be determined down the road, depending on the site, the size, the needs that we could have, and really it was all about meeting the needs of the students. And Director Malloy talked about the idea of student voice. So finding out what our students need. If we're talking about the 21st century learner, then what does that look like? What do our students want? And for us to sit and arbitrarily decide this is what their building's going to look like and this is where it's going to be housed, we didn't feel that that was our mandate. What we felt was we needed to address the surplus pupil places in the board, in the North Cluster. We felt that by closing these 3 schools, we're creating an opportunity to build something that hasn't been done in this board for quite some time. And so that's what we're doing. John, 60-year.
Thank you. Trustee Petal?
So this, try to wait till the end. I figured a lot of questions. I had a lot of them, so if I wait, I'll get most of them answered. So I want to pick up on a couple of thoughts to get some clarity around, because I'm trying to look at this from the system perspective as well. I know Associate Director Bain tried to take us there, but we didn't really want to do that in the middle of what you shared with us. But I want to explore that a little bit with what your thinking was as a committee. So when I do my homework on numbers, I'm like, I absolutely agree. Delta's population is going down, Orchard Park's population is going down, McDonald's population is going down. For the record, that's my home school, so I went there when they opened that one. I get that school really well, but we've got stability at Churchill, we've got stability at Glendale. A lot of this is all based on feeder schools. The feeder school system that allows the kids to start to create loyalties long before they've even ever entered high school. And then when we look at the elementary panel, and these are just facts that I've kind of reworked based on our own statistics that come to us as trustees, the North Elementary panel is actually increasing. You're up 169 kids, 2% increase over the last 5 years. But where's that increase going to go? It's not a lot of kids, but there's a small increase happening in the North cluster. So there must be people moving in with little ones that are coming into our schools. So when I look at that big picture and I think about what are we going to do? Staff have kind of clarified now, which I suspected was what they were doing, that they're really looking at, absolute closures in June 2015. They're absolute closures, and there will only be a new school if there's funding. So I know may not quite read that way to you, but that's what it is. There is no need to come back to this Board of Trustees. If we approve this the way it was, it would be close, stay at McDonald. That's what this says. That's the short shift of it. So I just want to run by you and get your feedback, and I still have 2 more questions. Get your feedback on how that feels to you. That at the end of the day, if there is no money, and we're hearing today, quite frankly, that there's some pretty drastic decisions being made by the government right now with respect to funding. We've already heard a couple of them today, and it's just going to get, I'm sure, worse. So worst case scenario, if there isn't a dollar to be given to this school board for new schools as opposed to maintain what you've got, McDonald and Delta are running about equally at 15 million each. I don't understand why McDonald, probably the newest of all of them, is actually the neediest at the moment. I'm a little worried about that. That seems to be happening in a few places. But are you okay with that? I mean, through the chair, are you okay with, at the end of the day, if you can't get that perfect vision, that McDonald is the next best answer? Through the chair? Your
Not
opinion?
sure that the ARC can answer that. Because they're speaking for the committee, and you're asking them to bring an opinion right now that the committee has not discussed.
Okay, so let me rephrase it. Does the committee understand that backup plan is actually already a part of the staff recommendation? Does the committee understand that?
Mark, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So at the beginning of this, back in February 2011, the staff recommendation was the closure of Delta and the closure of Parkview. That's where we started. And we debated the staff recommendation. We came up with our own options. I think at one point we had 7 different options in play. At the end of the day, we felt that based on our discussions, the meetings that we had with various community groups, the input that we had from our public forums and facilities, that this was the best option. So we felt that as a board, and our recommendation to you is that we see the closure of these 3 schools. And that's sort of what we've come up with. If it's not financially viable, then hopefully people can be creative. If we can be creative in how we're going to program for the 21st century, maybe there could be programming or creative solutions to a funding deficit.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would also echo that if we have 14 million in renewal costs at one school and 15 at another, and
Right.
we can't get funding for a new building, maybe we can get funding for renewal, which can then be transferred into new. It's the same amount. It's almost the same amount of money. There are lots of different options to go through funding and find a way to make a case for this. I think certainly going to the government telling them we're closing 3 to open one new 21st century learning facility is something that they definitely have to look at. And if they don't, we can get any political commentary.
No. Still cash flow, though. It's still cash flow. They have to have the money to give it to us instead of deferred maintenance is over time. New school is all at once. Okay, two more questions. One of them is around the boundary. It's very clear that there is no school in the center currently that the school board owns. So what consideration was given to what I like to call ripple effects, where boundaries bump up one against another? So if, the staff recommendation is probably where the question should go through, Mr. Chair, because if they're phasing the approach, building in a backup plan, and McDonald stays open, McDonald is sitting on the far corner of a boundary. Would staff be entertaining a boundary review to somewhat correct the way it's sitting, to alleviate transportation costs, to alleviate the pressure on Westdale, which was not in this review and is over capacity? So what is that? Would that be reasonable to expect that if we have to go only with close, and there is no money for new, cash flow reasons, whatever reasons at that moment, would that be something we'd be looking at?
Associate Director Band.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes. We would be pleased to entertain the notion of a boundary review in order to maximize our transportation routing.
Okay. Second question, so that's a ripple effect west. I'm looking at the ripple effect up to the mountain. Delta sits right under the escarpment. We have excellent HSR service in this city. We provide a lot of passes to kids. Kids are moving around somewhat, although not as much as we thought when we got into the details. So what consideration did the committee or staff give to students if Delta is closing, in particular Delta, with moving them up to one of the schools just above them on the top of the escarpment? What consideration was given to that from both views?
Good, Mark.
Through you, Mr. Chair. We discussed this very fact, but simply it came down to the fact that we couldn't count on the fact that if we closed Delta, that kids would willingly move to another school outside of the zone that we were looking in. And quite frankly, it didn't address the shortfall in the North Cluster. So the fact that we closed Delta and those students moved to, say, the South Cluster, for example, doesn't help the rest of the schools in the North Cluster.
Because it stays vacant.
It didn't address the Parkview situation, it didn't address the John A situation. So as a committee, we looked at the entire cluster, not just one particular school.
Okay, just for understanding, we have to look at the whole system, right? We have to look at all three clusters together, so. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Trustee Simmons.
Thank you. Just with some of the things I've heard, I just want to make sure that the community understands that what we've received today is the community's best thinking and staff's best thinking, but no decision's been made. Staff doesn't make the ultimate decision at the end of the day. The Board of Trustees do. So I don't want anyone to think that anything other than that will happen. Thank you.
Thank you. No other, Trustee Mahoney.
I just have one quick comment just to reinforce the boundary changes. The population at Delta now, the Rosedale population now go to Delta. But in the last 20 years, that population has gone to Delta, Glendale, and Sir Winston Churchill. And they've even split Rosedale in half, one side of the street. So they haven't always gone to Delta. So there is a chance that it is possible. I only say possible. Now, I'm not saying I'm suggesting what you're doing, but it has been changed many times over the last 20 years.
Okay. Seeing no other speakers, I need somebody to move the recommended action, which is on 6.1, that trustees receive the accommodation review reports, Delta Secondary, Glendale Secondary, Orchard Park Secondary, Sir John A. Macdonald Secondary, Sir Winston Churchill Secondary, and defer a final decision until May 2012. See all kinds of hands. We'll go Trustee Brennan and Trustee White. Trustee Bell.
So why does the motion have May 2012? We were talking about that earlier, that is the earliest date, 60 days. And we were also talking earlier how, it would not be wise and would not be healthy for anyone to do 3 decisions on the same night. It's quite possible that any one of these could shift over to June. So I'm very concerned that we've actually put May. Normally, I really like timelines. But in this particular case, I'm reluctant to agree with a motion that says May. I would prefer to do something that we defer the decision no later than, and I would prefer to go that route as opposed to lock us down to May, because I'm concerned that we will need more time for the public to come in and speak to us, that we can't do them all in one night.
Are we all listening here?
No, not yet. So I'm very concerned about that timeline. I'm not saying I have the answer for what, but I'm very uncomfortable. I'd like us to try an amendment. Seeing some nods. I'm thinking that the amendment needs to be no later than, and then we would say June, probably, so that we have some latitude to shift those dates that a few of us around the table have already discussed. So it's not procrastinating it too far. It's taking this particular, receive it, defer it, no later than the end of June 2012. That's my amendment.
I want to get a comment from Associate Director Bain.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if it's the trustees' interest to include no later than, staff is fine with that.
I think the important thing for everybody to remember is that 60-day thing that starts ticking at February 27th. I think what this is intending is no decision can be made before May 2012, so keeping that in mind, all right? So no decision.
No earlier than May 2012.
That's right. So that's what I'm asking, is, so we have trustee Peddle moving an amendment to change this to June 2012. Do we have a seconder for somebody want to do that? Okay, well, I don't have anybody seconding yet to speak to it yet. I need somebody to second it before we speak to it. I don't see anybody seconding it. We want to try a different wording maybe.
Maybe.
Trustee White.
I think you had it right, Mr. Chair, in that the reference to May 2012 is that it should be no earlier than May 2012. It wasn't so much an end date as it was a beginning, a starting point. So if we were to amend it to anything, I think it should say and defer a final decision no earlier than May 2012.
It's the same
So
process.
if
Yeah.
as a seconder, I would support that.
Okay, so moving no earlier than May 2012, do we have a seconder for that? Trustee Church. Okay, any discussion on the amendment? Seeing no discussion, voting on the amendment only. All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. Now we are voting on the amended motion, which now ends final decision no earlier than May 2012. All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you.